Hi, my name is Blake Bettner, managing editor of Worn and Wound. Today we are talking about a pair of dateless dive watches, everybody's favorite topic. Today we have a pair of what some might call iconic dive watches, the Rolex Submariner and the Tudor Pelagos. We've talked a lot about both of these watches. There is books full of content about both of these watches, but these two references in particular interest me because I find them so similar. We're talking about the Rolex 14060M and the Tudor Pelagos 39. Now, these are watches that might fall into the boring category for some, but these are both my own watches, and they're watches that I get really excited about. Okay, so why do these two watches remind me of one another? Quite a few reasons. They are very similar in dimensions and in weight. So the Submariner 14060 right here is listed as a 40mm watch, but between the calipers it actually measures 39.4 millimeters. The Pelagos 39, obviously a 39mm watch, actually measures 39.6 millimeters. So in other dimensions they're also equally similar. In thickness, the Rolex is 12.3 millimeters, while the Pelagos 39 is 12 millimeters flat. The biggest departure is maybe their lug-to-lug length, which is 47.6 on the Submariner and 46.1 on the Pelagos 39. So overall, a very similar footprint on the wrist. However, the profile of the cases differ quite a bit. You'll notice the very slim case wall here on the Rolex compared to the Tudor. However, it has a bit more of a protrusion here on the case back that is absent on the Tudor, which sits a little bit flatter on the wrist. Okay, so what about the weight? The Pelagos 39 is obviously fully titanium, including the bracelet. This watch weighs 104 grams, and the Submariner weighs 125 grams. So obviously titanium is lighter than steel, so it's going to come out a little bit below the Submariner, but in hand, it's really hard to perceive, and they feel and wear very similarly on the wrist. And that follows through in just the heads of the watch as well, where the Tudor Pelagos 39, just the head weighs 60 grams, whereas the Submariner, just the head weighs 72 grams. Now, this era of Rolex watches are a little bit different from modern Rolexes. There's something of a jangliness to them, particularly in their bracelets. The 14060s, every single one of them had drilled lugs and hollow end links. So this one definitely has a lightness in its feeling just because of those attributes, where the Tudor has a much tighter overall feeling, being that it's a modern watch altogether. Now, obviously these two watches are extended family members, you could say, Tudor being under the Rolex umbrella, of course. So I think there's a lot that these two watches say about one another, and it's easy to picture an alternate timeline where maybe this Pelagos 39 is the future version of the Submariner that we never got. This has a lot of the features and charm of the Submariner and pushes it further into kind of a modern territory. Obviously, it doesn't have quite the same design cues as the Submariner, but there's a lot here that I would have loved to have seen on a Submariner and would still love to see on a Submariner. Obviously, the full use of titanium is something that Rolex just got in the business of doing. I think this would do really well in the Submariner lineup. The Pelagos 39 also seems to acknowledge the adjacent lineage of the Submariner, with, of course, the red line of text on the dial, which the Submariner had in the reference 1680 from the late 60s to the early 70s. There was a few-year run where the Submariner was, of course, written in red. A dateless version around that era would have been the 5513 and 5512s, did not get that red Submariner text, so it's slightly different there. It's still a nice nod to have, and it has the added benefit of reducing some of the visual weight of those 4 lines of text on the dial. Now, this 14060 has 4 lines of text as well, which of course came on the latest variants of this reference. The 14060 has a pretty lengthy history that goes back to the late 80s and into 2011, just before the introduction of the ceramic bezeled Submariner the year after. The 14060Ms, that M stands for modified, by the way, came around 2000, and that M signifies the move to the 3130 movement, something of a legend these days, and a movement itself that lasted through into the subsequent generation of ceramic bezeled Submariners. So while it got the more accurate and robust 3130 movement, it wasn't until around 2007 that they actually had them chronometer rated, and that's where those 4 lines of text come from on the dial. Not all of them had it, just the very late production units of the 14060Ms. I am in the minority in that I actually prefer those 4 lines of text on the dial. Something about it makes it feel a little bit more modern to me. So there's a few other interesting details about these two watches that kind of play well off of each other. For one, you'll notice there are some polished surfaces here on the Submariner, namely the case wall and the bezel assembly, which has kind of a chunkiness to it. The Tudor obviously does not have any polished surfaces. It's a little more uniform in texture and in color throughout. However, the bezel gets this sunray finish, which does add a touch of ornateness about it. And another big departure is the shape of the crown guard. There, of course, the Tudor kind of recalls the point of the shield, and the Rolex gets that kind of thumbed crown guard that we know and love. So the Submariner obviously still looks a lot like this 14060 today. It's really the dimensions of everything else around it that have changed. The shape of the case, the shape of the lug, but the hands, the hour markers, the dial has changed relatively little since then. It's kind of like a 911 in that way. It's kind of subtle evolution over the generations, for better or worse. I like seeing modern divers push ahead in a way that doesn't have anything to recall in the past. And the Pelagos 39 is a perfect example of that. And that's probably the biggest departure from the Submariner that I certainly appreciate. So while there's a lot of rhyming between these two watches, there's a heap of heritage that the Submariner kind of has on its shoulders, where the Pelagos is free to kind of do its own thing. That said, I would still love to see Rolex incorporate some of the qualities that Tudor's been putting into these Pelagos in their Submariner line. I don't think there's anything wrong with making a jump a little bit further ahead than the subtle evolutions that we've seen in the past. Now, there is a gulf in price between these two watches. The Rolex comes in around $10,000, a little over, where the Pelagos 39 is just under $5,000. So is it worth it to make the jump up to something like a 14060 from the Tudor? You know, frankly, probably not. And I think you go for the Rolex if you want the name, if you care about that heritage design that's still going to this day. But if you really want a high quality, modern, dateless diver, I think Tudor has you covered in spades here with this Pelagos 39. And that's not a knock against the Submariner. I love the Submariner. But this is the version of kind of a future Submariner that I would have liked to have seen from Rolex at some point and hope to still see sometime down the line. So more than anything, these two watches maybe say a great deal about the brands that they come from, where Rolex kind of moves a little bit slowly, takes very small iterative changes to their references over time, all while respecting the original template of the watches. While Tudor is a little bit more free to create their own new generation of icons, which I would call the Pelagos line. These are two just really great diver, scratch that, tool watches. These represent a lot of what I love about watches in general and how I use watches. Wearing them every day, using them regardless of the activity that I'm doing. These are watches that stand up to a lot of that and gain a lot of meaning through those things, to me at least. So these watches say a lot about why I love watches and the kind of things that I enjoy collecting, because I use them. And that's what these things are for at the end of the day. So I have a lot more of my thoughts on the Rolex Submariner 14060M and the Tudor Pelagos 39, now live on wornandwound.com. We'll put a link down below if you care to read that. Thank you for tuning in and watching this. If you enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe. It helps us out a lot. And until next time, take care.